Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope you're all excited for this conversation. I know I am. I'm Tanya Davidge. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Curator at Open House Melbourne, and my first job of this evening was going to be to invite Uncle Colin Jr. to the stage to welcome us all to country. And unfortunately, like a lot of Melbourne, he has the dreaded lurgy. I'm glad to see you're all here, but Uncle Colin can't be with us this evening. So instead you've got me, and I am going to acknowledge country on behalf of the City of Melbourne. I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which the City of Melbourne governs, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respect to their elders, past and present. We acknowledge and honour the unbroken spiritual, cultural and political connection they have maintained to this unique place for more than 2,000 generations. Indigenous sovereignty has never been ceded in Australia, and at Open House Melbourne we're very mindful of this, given our focus on the modern built environment, and especially given the topic of our conversation today. So welcome to Designing with Country. This is the first event in our weekend, and we're hoping that you are all super excited for the weekend festival to come. What I love about the Open House Melbourne weekend is that it speaks to Melbourne. It basically delivers every single thing that Melbourne loves, and Melbourne loves a lot. So the weekend has sporting facilities, including the Whitten Oval and the State Netball Hockey Centre, which is now the home of the Vixens, and I hear they're doing really well, so it'd be great to head out there. We've got artist studios, including Abbotsford Convent and street art studios. Everfresh, Blender, and Ronan Callum Preston Studio is going to open up for us this year. We have train stations, including Anzac Station and also Glen Huntly Station, which is also a beautiful little one, obviously at a slightly different scale. We have beautiful homes, we have wonderful new architectural projects, including Ballam Place in Brunswick, and also Melbourne Place in the city, a lovely new hotel designed by Kennedy Nolan. We have our much-loved heritage buildings, including the Gothic Bank and Parliament House, and so many more. I'm kind of excited to get down to the Donkey Wheel House this year because I haven't seen it yet. And we even have the Werribee Zoo on the program this year, where you can learn about how you might design for an elephant, just in case that ever crossed your plate. There really is something for everybody on the weekend, and we hope to see you out and about. The weather is looking a bit dismal, but we know Melbourne, and we know you'll all just pop on your wet weather gear and get on with the job. But now, on to the main event for this evening, Designing with Country. So this event is one we run every year in partnership with the Yulendj Weelam Lab, and this year we're running it as part of the Melbourne Conversations series. It's presented in partnership with us and Federation Square, and it talks about the topics that matter most to Melburnians. We're really excited about this conversation this evening, and I'd now like to hand over to Councillor Olivia Ball to introduce the event. Welcome, Olivia.
Thank you, Tanya, very much. And it's wonderful to see a full house here tonight. This is something that Melbourne loves and we turn out for. My name is Olivia Ball. I'm a councillor here at the City of Melbourne on Melbourne City Council. So it is my great honour to represent those of you who live in this municipality and to welcome all of you on behalf of the City of Melbourne, those of you who don't have the pleasure of living here. I want to add to Tanya's acknowledgement of country my own, with deep respect, of course, to the Eastern Kulin people and the sophisticated cultures that have occupied this continent since the beginning of time and who have lived through ice ages, volcanic eruptions and colonisation. I pay my deepest respects to the elders of this land and acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded, and I hope you'll all join with me in committing ourselves to truth, to justice and to treaty. I want to acknowledge Tanya Davidge and the Open House team for bringing us together, not only for tonight's special event, but for this very exciting weekend ahead of us, to our event partner, Fed Square, and this beautiful venue, and all of tonight's panellists that we look forward to hearing from. Tonight is the launch event for Open House Melbourne Weekend, this unmissable, incredibly popular weekend of special events. And the City of Melbourne is very proud to support an event like this tonight, which goes deeper than many. The Melbourne Conversation series is always an opportunity to hear from interesting and influential people on fascinating topics, but tonight, perhaps more than ever, is a chance to really listen and to learn. So congratulations and thank you for taking this time out of your day to come here to listen and to learn, and may we never tire of learning about country and being guided by our traditional owners. At the City of Melbourne, we have discussions with First Nations communities all year round, and the benefit of many First Nations staff. This year, we're profoundly aware of a significant milestone in our collective history, the Yurruwiwi Justice Commission having recently come to a close. And we're all reflecting, I hope, on the historical and ongoing injustices experienced by Aboriginal people in this part of the continent we now call Victoria since 1834. The City of Melbourne recognised this as an opportunity to contribute to truth-telling by uncovering our institutional history as the first colonial government here in Naarm, from its foundation as Melbourne Town Council in 1842 up to the present day. We commissioned an independent historian to delve into the public record and piece together a history that I think has never been written before, and submitted it to Yurruwiwi as a formal public submission. I look forward to this being published for wider consumption as a short history. We're also working with First Nations peoples to create a Stolen Generations marker in our city. It was a recommendation of the Bringing Them Home report, many of you will remember as long ago as 1997, that individuals, families and communities affected by forced child removal should be commemorated. This is important not just for victims and survivors, but for society as a whole. We are thrilled to have celebrated Muti Muti, Yorta Yorta, Bunwurrung and Wemba Wemba artist Marie Clark making this memorial, and it is designed for a site you're overlooking right now, known as Peppercorn Lawn, not something most people have heard of, but it's an area of lawn on the south side of the Birrarung, just this way. And it will become part of the stories of the City of Melbourne, a place of gathering, remembrance, commemoration and community. Stories of the city being the theme of this year's open house. I really want to congratulate everyone who has worked on this exciting weekend and for casting widely for the stories of our city. Because we know, I see right now, how important understanding and caring for country is to Melburnians. At the City of Melbourne, we recently held a summit inviting people to Melbourne Town Hall to tell us what they wanted for the future of their city. It was called M2050 Summit, and over 700 people came for a full day of engagement, creating together a vision for our city 25 years hence. And we heard from the people of Melbourne on that day how important it was to embed First Nations knowledge in our planning for our future. This could mean understanding and aligning with traditional local seasons as observed over thousands of generations in this place. People spoke also of regenerative action and of open space and of nature and caring for the Birrarung. and all of our parks and gardens, which carry great significance in different ways. I'd refer you to Mapping Aboriginal Melbourne, a website which reveals layers and layers of history and culture of Melbourne. That if you Google Mapping Aboriginal Melbourne, you'll discover a whole lot of new things about your city. And part of this summit was a First Nations roundtable, which gave us an incredible impetus. Imagine, it's 2050, and Melbourne is led by First Nations self-determination and Black cultural resurgence, with everyone sharing a deep connection to country. As a new council elected in November, we are now working on a council plan for the next 4 years, and many voices flow into our decision making. Tonight, I hope you get a lot out of exploring this topic. There are many ways to further experience First Nations knowledge and culture during Open House Melbourne weekend. Some of the highlights being the Heritage Coexistence discussion on Saturday night, which brings together some European guests and First Nations perspectives. Also, if you haven't seen it already, I can't recommend highly enough the 65,000 Years, A Short History of Australian Art exhibition at Melbourne University at the Potter Museum. That's open this weekend especially, but also 5 days a week until November. And just here in our beloved Fed Square, Koori Heritage Trust, a treasure of modern Melbourne with its award-winning makeover, and it's worth seeing on this program this weekend, and also visit throughout the year with free guided tours every day at lunchtime. Workshops, walking tours, fascinating locations and insights, all in this packed weekend. I hope you're as excited as I am to get into it. So thank you and congratulations to all the organisers for this huge and stimulating program. Thank you all for being here. I hope you have a brilliant night and a wonderful weekend. And with that, I want to welcome up our panellists to the stage and hand over to our hosts, Jock and Christine. Please join me on the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Olivia Ball. That was very powerful words there and a lot of information to take in, some wonderful things that this city are doing. I have read that report, the Yurok report. It's now on the curriculum for RMIT architecture students, the exhibition up the road, the short history of Australian art is also tremendous. So thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Wominjeka, everyone, welcome. Thank you all so much for making it here in the middle of Melbourne winter. Thank you to Open House Melbourne and Federation Square and Melbourne Conversations for making this event possible. So my name is Christine Phillips and I am a non-Indigenous architect. I currently work full-time as an academic at RMIT, and I'm a co-leader of the Yulendj Weelam Lab from the RMIT School of Architecture and Urban Design. I work with Jock, Gilbert, Ngawi Professor Carolyn Briggs, and Barkindji Weaver Sophia Pearce. And together we are working with communities and I'm learning a tremendous amount through that process. My heart goes out to Uncle Colin Hunter Jr. I hope he makes a speedy recovery. And also to Tanya Davic and the Open House Melbourne team for all the hard work they've done in putting this event together this evening, and for the amazing events coming up over the weekend. So I would firstly like to acknowledge that we are on the very beautiful but unceded lands, the Bik of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, that we gather here today. And I also acknowledge their nearby neighbours, the Bunurong peoples. As I mentioned, we work a lot with Ngawi, Professor Briggs, so I pay my respects to her. And to their elders past and present, and extend this acknowledgement to all First Peoples that are here this evening. And of course, especially to Owen Cafe and Leila Gurruwiwi, who we will hear from very soon. And to acknowledge the deep connections and knowledge that they will be sharing with us this evening. We are indeed privileged. And as I look out, I do love this space. It's a beautiful space, partly because we do get that connection outside to country. And right behind me, we have the Birrung, the river of mist, which reminds us that this place was once a nourishing wetlands ecosystem, a supermarket for the Wurundjeri people, as Wurundjeri elder Uncle Bill Nicholson once said to me. But as you take a walk along the Birrung, and I'm sure many of you have done that, we also see some very contemporary markers of country created from First Peoples, mostly from the Eastern Kulin Nation, which also reminds us that we are living in a place where the oldest surviving cultures continue to dynamically transform and grow today. This year's Open House Melbourne theme is Stories of the City. So, as a non-Indigenous architect, I am continuously reflecting on what it means to design on, to work on, and to live on these unceded lands. I am a guest, and this is my purpose. What does it mean to design on land that has over 65,000 years of culture and knowledge embedded within it? What does that mean as an architect or a designer? How do we connect and reconnect meaningfully with country? What are the stories of country that can strengthen all of our connections and all aspects of country? The notion of country is fundamental to Indigenous ways of knowing and being. Yet, as architects and landscape architects increasingly seek to engage with this concept, the question remains, what is country? How do the diverse peoples from across this nation we call Australia understand and define country? How diverse is that concept? And how might we all learn from understanding and speaking with First Peoples about their relationships with country, and how might that deepen our understandings of how we are actually designing and thinking about our built environments in relation to country? How can we do that responsibly? So this year's Designing with Country discussion invites all of you to participate in exploring these questions with these leading Indigenous thinkers, Owen Cafe and Leila Gurruwiwi, in conversation with myself and my very esteemed colleague, Dr. Jock Gilbert, who is a non-Indigenous landscape architect and academic at RMIT University, and also, as I mentioned, a co-leader of the Yulendj Weelam Lab. I'll now hand over to you, Jock, to introduce our guests.
Thanks, Christine. I'd just like to reiterate my thanks to Councillor Ball. That was a wonderful introduction, and thanks to Tanya and all the team. It's my very privileged position, and I have to say it's a very humbling position to be able to introduce to you Owen Cafe and Leila Gurruwiwi. And we were having a chat earlier, and I can assure you that everything that I tell you about these two amazing people is just very much the tip of the iceberg. Incredible. So, excuse me, as Christine said, please engage through the Slido, and I'm sure we'll have some fantastic questions and some fantastic responses. So, Leila, Leila is a proud Yolngu woman of the Gulpu clan from northeast Arnhem Land. She brings with her a wealth of experience as a cultural awareness advocate, a media personality, which many of us will have engaged with, and a mentor with 11 years as a reporter and newsreader on the fantastic Maan Grook footy show. As well as this, she's had acting roles in acclaimed productions like Glitch and The Secret River. Leila, your face is familiar to so many of us, so it's really fantastic to be able to share your knowledge tonight. Beyond the screen, Leila has made a profound impact in education and community work. She's mentored young women through the Wirrapunda Foundation's Deadly Sister Girls program and supported students at the Pavilion School, helping those who've been disengaged from mainstream education to find their path again. Currently, Leila's also working for has worked for a number of years as the Education Office for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Education at Catholic Education Melbourne, now known as MACS, or the Melbourne Archdiocese Catholic Schools. And in this role, she's worked and continues to work tirelessly to support Indigenous students and their families, fostering strong cultural identity and pride within school communities. Leila now works in the arts as a public programs officer at Agency Projects, a non-profit organisation that elevates and celebrates First Nations artists and their communities locally, nationally and indeed internationally, which is fantastic work. She's also co-producing and very excited about a documentary titled Jarra Charra, which celebrates the rise of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander fashion designers on both local and international stages. And perhaps most importantly, I don't know about perhaps, I think most importantly, Leila is a proud mum to her son Zoma, who we see on the screen, nurturing in him a deep connection to both his Indigenous and Nigerian heritage. Welcome, Leila. Thank you. Welcome and thank you. And also joining the conversation is Owen Cafe, a proud Whadjuk Pinjarrup person and principal landscape architect at Blacklash. His work is grounded in a commitment to social, ecological and cultural justice, and he uses design as a tool for connection, healing and change. And I'm sure we'll hear much more about that as the night progresses. At the heart of Owen's practice is a deep engagement with the intersection of culture, identity and ecology, informing spaces that foster meaningful connections to country. Beyond practice, Owen also teaches across several Australian universities. He's a senior lecturer at QUT, and he works to embed Indigenous perspectives into design education, curriculum and development. He also contributes to national reform through his roles on the Queensland AILA Executive Board and its connection to country committees. Fantastic and tireless worker, and we're very, very privileged to have him down here tonight, and I hope he's staying warm a little bit. Thank you very much and welcome, Owen.
That was the formal introductions, and these two have very impressive CVs, as you heard, but I'm also curious to find out a little bit more of your personal histories, and Leila, you have a pretty interesting story coming from a family of eight brothers and sisters. Tell us a little bit about your history, who are you, what makes you?
No worries. How is everyone tonight? Are we well? Yes? Warm? Yes? I wish I'd had an extra layer of clothing on tonight, but that's my own fault for not bringing that tonight. Thank you so much, Christine and Jock, for inviting myself and also Owen to be a part of this conversation tonight. Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge the fact that I am also a visitor to this country, and even though my roots run pretty deep here in Victoria, I'm not of this place. So my name is Laurel Ridialpi Mindali Gurruwiwi, but most people know me as Leila Gurruwiwi, and as a proud Yolngu woman of the Gulpu clan, originally from northeast Arnhem Land, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that I am lucky and privileged and honoured to live and thrive on every single day the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all First Nations people who are here in the room with us tonight, and especially to my panellist and colleague Owen as well. And it's lovely to have you down here in the south, in the cold, brother, to have this conversation. So my life starts very far away from where we currently are here in Naarm on Wurundjeri and Bunurong country. I'm originally from northeast Arnhem Land, which is a 4-hour flight from Melbourne to Darwin, and then another 1.5-hour flight from Darwin over to a little community called Gurruwiwi on Elcho Island, where my siblings live, 4 boys and 4 girls, so mum and dad evened it all out in the end. And me and my little sister Sabrina, we share the middle child role between the two of us, because there's 3 siblings on the one side of me and 3 siblings on her side. And I lived in Arnhem Land and with family and extended family for a very short amount of time. So I was 18 months old when my parents and the extended family made a decision that would change the trajectory of my life. And they understood that coming from a remote community, that there weren't a lot of opportunities in that space. So they decided that I would go and live with an extended family member away from country and community and family. And I grew up in a little country town, which isn't so little anymore, called Bendigo. Does anyone know Bendigo? Yeah, a couple of people. So that's where I grew up since I was 18 months old on Wurrung country in Bendigo. And when I was growing up per capita, it was the most Anglo-Saxon community in Australia at the time. So I like to say I was a bit of a black dot in a sea of white growing up there. But a lot of my friends that I grew up with are still people who I hold really close and dear to my heart, who are all kind of Anglo background and whatnot. Had a lovely kind of childhood growing up in Bendigo, Victoria, and again have deep roots there because of all of my memories. I have no memories prior to being in Bendigo, so there's strong connections to place for me there because of that, and my connection to the Koori community in Victoria and in Bendigo, as well as my adopted Koori family that I grew up with, which are the Moors and Andersons, who are Wamba mob from kind of the Swan Hill area as well. So that's my kind of Koori connection, if you will. And then, as most people do that live in a little country town when they grow up, you want to spread your wings and go to other places. So I ended up coming down to the big smoke here in Melbourne, Naarm, and graduated from high school here and out in the west at Catholic Regional College in Sydenham. If anyone knows that school, that's the school that I graduated from. And 6 months out of high school, Marngrook started. So I was 19 years old when I started on that and did that for the majority of my adulthood up until 2019. So a big chunk of my life was spent being on television, which was pretty crazy. And being on Marngrook meant that it opened lots of other doors for me, which included acting and working in the education space and inevitably finding myself in the arts, which really kind of fills my cup from a cultural perspective, a spiritual perspective, an artistic and creative perspective.
Thanks, Leila. That's beautiful, and we might unpack a little bit more of that as we go through the night, as they say. What about you, Owen? As they say in the classic, where do you come from?
G'day, everyone. Similarly, before I continue, just want to acknowledge country. I'm also a visitor here. I'm a visitor back home in Brizzy as well, Mugginjin and Yuggera country. Acknowledgements happen so much. I think I'm number 4 tonight, for example. And I don't think that happened tonight, but often they become quite tokenistic. I try to acknowledge country as a process of an enactment. If you're acknowledging something, then you need to act upon it. If we're acknowledging country and the respect for country and the respect for our elders, then we need to act on that respect and contribute. And so in acknowledging all the elders past, those yet to come, I want to acknowledge their resilience in resisting what was a genocide, just like we're seeing in Palestine. Everything you're seeing there, were it to have happened today, is what you would have been seeing here. And none of us would be sitting in this room, we wouldn't be sitting here having this yarn if it wasn't for the resilience of those people. So I want to acknowledge the resilience of the Palestinian people in continuing to fight the colonial regime that continues here in Australia today with deaths in custody and alike. But I also want to acknowledge the generosity of the mob that I get to spend all my time with, the Yagara people, the Kabi Kabi people. I grew up on Kabi Kabi country, so that's Yulendj Noosa, so not too bad beaches. It was, you leave and then you're like, why did I do that? But anyway, yeah, so I was really lucky to grow up predominantly in Yulendj, in the Kabi Kabi country. My mother's part of the stolen generation, so I'm Wadjuk Pindrup man, so that's Perth Bunbury mob with ties down to the Bibbulmun community, which is Margaret River, and my one joke is if you drink red wine, you are welcome. But there are a few people in this room that have heard that a few times. But anyway, so we grew up predominantly on Kabi Kabi country, and through that phase, you know, the intergenerational trauma that my mum carried and so on, it was pretty tough times, to be honest. But it's kind of hard to carry a frown in places like that on such beautiful country with the ocean and the salt, which on my journey I didn't realise was resonating with me as a saltwater person back from my own country. And so I'm really lucky today to be able to call the Kabi Kabi mob, or many of the elders there, my friends, and to be able to give back to them. And similarly on Yagara country, I'll try my best to centre them and their generosity in helping me come up as an Aboriginal man, understand what responsibility is. You know, through that time, it got pretty dark, and I almost died actually. But I call it the best worst thing that ever happened to me through drug addiction and homelessness and all these kinds of things. But what I realised is when you're at the bottom and things are really dark, the singular lights are super bright. It gives you a frame of reference and perspective, and it sort of allowed me to understand where I needed to go, and that's why I moved down to Yagara country. And as I found my own feet, the anger just kept increasing with the ridiculousness of the politics that we see in this colony that is called Australia, at least internationally anyway. And so I was like, well, I need a bit of paper apparently to be in the room to argue with these people. So I went to uni and studied landscape architecture and met one of the most influential people in my life. So I want to give a big shout out to Andrew Belcher right there. Could I get a little clap for this man over here? It's a really tall guy. Yeah, and was able to be nurtured not only by Andy, but other beautiful people, and find my space and be held by all the mob in Brizzy, and lucky enough to come and yarn with you guys. And yeah, it's very interesting to be sitting here actually. And you know, my mum's very proud. But yeah, I think that's kind of
always good
really.
when your mum's proud.
Yeah, she's an aggressive woman, so it'd be interesting if she wasn't. Nah, she's funny, we're mates. Anyway. Yeah, anyway, I don't know if I said that right, but that's my rant. Yeah.
And that's what we're after. That's
awesome.
Beautiful, both of you. Thank you very much. Yeah. That's a kind of nice segue into a question that I've been sort of kind of burning to ask, and I've been asking it of myself for a long time, and of the profession through publication and exhibition. But I'm really keen, Owen, you're a landscape architect, you touched on that, and that gives you, and I returned to study too as a mature age student, and it kind of gives us some sort of position through which to argue. What slowly dawns on me is that the profession itself is a cog in the machine of the colony, and we understand country as an enduring way of understanding the world that has been connected to this country and world for tens or hundreds of thousands of years, for immeasurable time. And yet for a very brief space of time, imported from Europe and North America, is this concept of landscape. And so that in itself is colonising. And then landscape and I'm speaking as a landscape architect. I'm sure there's landscape architects in the room, but we through the act of profession are recolonising. And so I'm wondering how you reconcile that, and kind of what your thoughts are in terms of how that impacts on your practice, both of country and of design. And it's a long question now, thinking about the future of the profession, really, in relation to that, because I think it's existential.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Wow, Jock, I thought we were going to leave that
me too.
later on, but go for it.
No, I think I'm just going to lock in. No, it is really interesting. A huge issue that there are many issues that we all face, whether that's as landscape architects, doesn't matter, is twofold. One is that the built environment has always, and as far as we can see right now, will continue to be used as a tool of violence and oppression against all people, especially First Peoples, and in this context, our peoples. And so it's very challenging to be a participant in that system and trying to divert it in such a way that doesn't generally meet economic standards, which is imaginary. So it is quite challenging in that perspective, and that's sort of the first fold that we struggle with a lot at Blacklash, the firm I work at, and when I was in traditional practice at Aspect and RPS and places like that, is that it's very hard to turn a ship that's going very fast. And that is the colony and the extraction of country. And I say country not as just a physical, I mean the country that's inside us. You know, it saps away our humanity and our capacity to build relationships with places, and everybody in this room is a relational creature. That's how we evolved. We are of a community. Everything we know comes from relationship to something, and the current status of the neoliberal capitalist built environment structure is an endeavour to cancel those relationships, because individualism is the heart of capitalism. And so that leads into the second fold, is that we have a really big issue and challenge with language. Even as I sit here right now, I'm using the language of the coloniser, and that reframes my lens and my capacity to engage with the world and the people around me, which is part of why language revitalisation efforts are so important. If you don't have a word for something, you can't describe it, and then it becomes very hard to engage with it. And so words like landscape and things like that make it very easy to compartmentalise things into avenues which stems all the way back from the Enlightenment and the Descartesian sort of model where everything is of its own and nothing is related. And if you do that, it allows you and gives you permission to objectify it and therefore butcher it, extract it, and so on. And that's why we have a specialist for everything, right? And no one talks to each other. And so trying to break down the language that we use is central to everything that at least I try to do. You know, everything does come back to the humanisation. And again, when I say human, I mean a participant in a broader ecology that, you know, we are on an organism that is Earth and all those kinds of things. And so all of those things are antithetical to a country-centred process or a cultural process. You know, everything that our old people did back in the day was as a participant in a relationship. And when you use words like sight, a completely imaginary word that's used to carve out a point of responsibility to meet some dollar value, you're starting at a negative. And it becomes very challenging through design to challenge that. But I would also argue that design is communication. Every line that you draw is saying something. It was worth X to us, so we did this and battled that out. And so that then, if we're talking about darkness and light, like before, full circle, it also gives you a path of something to approach and challenge. If we can reframe the language of the people that we're working with within the system, from the communities that we work with through to the design teams to everybody like the dreaded VM team, and then up to the politicians and so on. Sorry if there's VMs in the room, you do good work. Just crushing our dreams, no. But if you can challenge the language, then you can really find places to connect. And if people connect, they fight for things. It's very hard to fight for something you don't have a relationship with. And because we're all separated, our relationships are weaker. I don't think they don't exist, they're just weaker. And so all of our projects and all the work we try to do and everything like that is really just trying to reinstate relationships that used to exist with country in its time-folding, ever-present essence, but also as people in our process. And if we can't do that, then we're never going to get anywhere. But that is what we are. So really just by tapping into our core selves, we can come together better. And that's what we try to do, and it's very hard. But the most important part is that none of us are architects, landscape architects, whatever our profession is. That's not who we are. That's just a tool that we have in our belt that we use sometimes. And it's not always the right tool. If all you have is a hammer, then everything's a nail. We need to put our hammers away. And sometimes that's our professional selves to do something that's proper and impactful and meaningful. You know, we only have one planet. Wood is the rarest material in the galaxy, for example. All those kinds of things comes back to relationships and rephrasing our words to allow us to re-engage with ourselves in place. And it is challenging. I think I answered, I don't know. Great. Cool.
I could pick up on any one of those threads, Owen, but I did want to speak to language have a bit of a chat with Leila about language and language for you. Leila, I know when you made that big trip down to Bendigo, English was not your language. So having been through that journey, what does language mean for you in the way you engage with these interconnected relationships?
Yeah, so you're right there, Christine. So when I first moved down to Bendigo on Dja Dja Wurrung country at 18 months old, I'd already started speaking Yulendj, specifically Djambarapingu, which is my grandmother's language. We have 16 dialects that are spoken within our community in the Yolngu kind of landscape. And Djambarapingu was the language that I spoke. And it was interesting because there'd be times where I would be at kinder or the play centre with, little blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids. And I knew English because I'd heard it. And both my parents kind of worked in spaces with non-Indigenous people as well. So I understood English, but of course, these kids didn't understand Yulendj, so they would speak to me and I would understand what they were saying, and then I would respond in Djambarapingu, and they'd all really look really puzzled and perplexed because I wasn't giving the answer that they wanted because I didn't speak English. And I didn't actually speak English until I started at primary school. So I was 4 turning 5 when I started at St Killian's Catholic Primary School in Bendigo, and my family member that I grew up with in Bendigo, who is a Torres Strait Islander woman, came with me on my first day and told my teachers and my classmates that, Leila doesn't speak English, so you're going to have to help her learn how to speak English. And through that process, because at the time I also had another cousin brother who was living with me at the time, so I could speak Yulendj with him. And eventually he was 4 years older than me, so he had memories of home and of country and of family, and he just got homesick and left and went back up to Arnhem Land. And so then I had no one to speak to. So because of that, I just stopped speaking Yulendj, which is sad. And it's something that I've become much more conscious about the older that I've gotten, to start relearning my language, because it's in there. It's dormant, it's sleeping. And we talk about that in relation to a lot of First Nations languages, that they aren't necessarily gone and forgotten, but they are just sleeping. And you just need that next First Nations person to come along and re-energise that language again, which we are seeing happen in different spaces and places, which is really, really beautiful. So my family have a rule that when I go home, they refuse to speak to me in English. So it forces me to speak in Yulendj. And of course, you can see on the screen there, that's my 5-year-old tornado of chaos, Uzoma, which Jock spoke about before. And he speaks Yulendj as well as English, and also speaks a little bit of Igbo, because his father's from Igbo land in Nigeria. So it's an amazing thing to watch him kind of just flip and switch from one language to the next language to the next language, and finding words that he finds appropriate and then just using those words. So, you know, in relation to family members, he'll speak to them in the Yolngu context as opposed to, you know, Nana or something like that. He'll say Mani, which is, you know, his mother's mother, or his Ngati, which is his mother's father, instead of, you know, Poppy or Grandma and things like that. So it's been beautiful to watch him kind of connect with language in a completely different way to what I did growing up. But in saying that, I had an experience when I was about 4 or 5 years old where I don't know the vintage of people in this room, so I don't know if you'll remember these TV shows or not, but on the weekend you used to watch Rage first thing in the morning, and then straight after Rage was Video Hits. Hear a few giggles, so I know there's a few people that used to watch those as well. And I remember flicking on the screen one day and seeing this video clip, this music clip, and hearing this language and seeing this dance, and it was all new but also familiar at the same time. And what I was looking at for the first time was Yothi Indi, first the Treaty video clip, and then also Jabana. I'm sure most people know who Yothi Indi is in the room. For those that don't, they're a really well-known First Nations rock band that come from Arnhem Land. They sing in both English and in Yolngu, in Gumaj specifically, which is another dialect in Arnhem Land. And it was the first time I ever saw anyone that looked exactly like me on television. So I'd seen other blackfellas that looked similar to me, but it was the first time I saw faces that reflected my own. And I remember saying to my guardian, "Oh, those people look like me." And she said, "Well, they should, they're your family." And so that was the first time I realised, oh my goodness, that all of the Yolngu people that were the band members in that band in Yothi Indi were all related to me through kinship, through blood, through gurutto, and those sort of things. And because Yothi Indi was so big back then, I was able to keep connected to language and stories and history through their songs as well, on all of the different albums that they had. I used to have them on cassettes. You remember the cassettes? Before, of course, CDs, and now we've all got our iPhones that have a million trillion songs on them. But that was another way that I stayed connected to language, through listening to those songs. The Rumpy Band, another example of their lead singer was also from, George was also from Alco Island as well. So that was another way that I stayed connected.
And through that process of relearning Yurmata,
Yolngu, yeah.
Mata, I'm just thinking back to Owen's comments about language in relation to power structures and so forth. Has that given you a new perspective on English?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of shifted my lens in relation to English. And of course, you know, there's, even within our own kind of First Nations languages and dialects, there's slang language that you'd use, or baby language that you'd use with like young ones, and then that would shift when you move into teenagehood, and that would shift again you know, when you become an adult or a parent for the first time and things like that. And there's also political dialects and language that's used as well, and academic language within our dialects. So there's lots of different kind of ways of speaking in those spaces. And there's lots of people, like I'll just use the example of my Māori, who's you know, doing stuff through Charles Darwin University currently, and a lot of her kind of studying and reports are done in both English and in Yulendj, because she thinks in Yulendj first and can kind of articulate herself better in Yulendj than what she can in English. And there's kind of a shift where there's quite a few of you know, First Nations people who have been able to hold on to connections to language, now do that as well.
It's a very interesting and fraught space, isn't it, language? And I guess the constitution of language does allow us to speak to power. And as designers and creative people, I think it also allows us into other perspectives, which is kind of incredibly important, and allows us those languages ourselves. I'm speaking here from my own perspective as a non-Indigenous landscape architect, and it was really brought home to me quite powerfully a few years ago. I wrote an article, I collaborated with our colleague Sophia Pearce, who's a Barkindji scholar, and Tom Flugie, who's also might be here actually, who's a landscape architect with McGregor Coxall. And we were working on a rehydration project on a billabong. It was a community project up in Western New South Wales. And when we presented it, Sophia said, why don't we present it through the story of Leila, which is the butterfly? And so she provided the story as the preamble to why we were doing this work. And as an aside, at the next open house, Melbourne, the Leila Mansion was open in Brighton, and the Leila Mansion is about 150 rooms or something. No, it's not, it's 50 rooms. And it's a testament to one Grazier's ability to take all of the resources and money out of a station property up near Wilcannia and transfer all of that wealth down here to Brighton. And Leila, as he understood, as we understood at that point, that Leila means butterfly. And about 6 months later, Sophia rang me up in a state of high excitement. She said, I'd just been at a funeral and I ran into old Auntie so-and-so, and Auntie said, I was telling her the story of Leila, and she said, sis, that doesn't mean butterfly. Leila means that which is purposefully beautiful. And it just, I mean, it floored Sophia, it floored me too. It was just like,
Sophia
man.
did tell this story last year, so I feel like it's okay to share that.
It is. And so I think that's another aspect of design and creativity, that there's a kind of building a virtuous circle almost in where we're putting things out there that bring some of that language to the fore, and at the same time learning something really powerful about the world, you know, that this could happen, and what could we use, how could we use that to enrich our own practices? I'm not sure, I don't have the answer, but I thought that was, you know, it is that thing about, it is power and it's direct at power, but then it's also far more personal and kind of immediate, I guess, in terms of what we can do with it.
I mean, I think both of you shared a lot in your personal introductions, and I thank you both for that. And for me, that in a way speaks to an understanding of country in the way you shared with us your family, where you're situated, past and present situations in your life. Jock and I also invited you both to share with us some images that you can see up there, which we asked to share some images that resonate with you in relation to countries. So I'd like to ask you about that. Owen, your one is the one on the right.
I do not have children. That is not mine. Yeah, no, honestly, pretty hard can you send us a photo that represents country? I was like, oh man. No, I did think about it a lot. And this photo...
It's supposed to be a talking point, Owen.
Yeah, no, you got to make jokes. I chose this photo. It's from Noosa North Shore on Cubby Country. It's just like sand-blown sandstone, obviously erosion. I think everybody's seen some form of this in their life. The reason I picked this is because the more you look at it, the deeper in time you see. The more time you spend, the more you're able to build a relationship with where you're standing just by looking at the different patinations in that sandstone. There's drama in there, there's slowness in there, in the layers, there's however many hundreds of years. I am not a geologist. In that stone there, just like there is in all the soils in this land and in our people, and each of those layers has a different story to tell, but you need to spend time and connect with it to understand it. Growing up on Cubby Country and being a saltwater man, I look at that picture and I can feel the humidity in the salt, which is deeply lacking here in the dry coolness of Wurundjeri country. But I could sit there and stare at that for hours and imagine stories and things like that in time. But the wear and tear, but also the beauty in that is how I personally perceive country. Imperfection is perfection. As all things in life, and we were talking about this before, you grow and change in discomfort, and that's gorgeous, and that's actually what makes us very special. And I just see all of that in that image, and also the colours are cool, so that, yeah.
And Leila?
So, as mentioned before, that's a picture of my son, Uzoma. Becoming a mum was not something that I had on my cards, but I literally do everything that I do in all the contexts that I do because of him. I want him to live in a world that is hopefully better than the one that we have, and it was funny because he was born on the 30th of December 2019, so just slipped in to 2019, and of course we all know what happened in 2020. We had COVID that locked down the whole entire world, and Victoria was pretty heavy with the lockdowns at the time as well, and I'd already kind of had an idea in my mind of how I wanted my kind of first year of being a mum to kind of go, and that all kind of went out the window because originally I wanted to be able to take Uzo back home on country before he was 1 year old, and that just wasn't an option. So, and in that time as well, I hadn't had the opportunity to go home back on country. It's not something that I've been able to do regularly since I was probably a little kid before I finished high school. Life happens, work happens, all those sort of things. So this photo was taken when Uzoma went to Elko Island for the very first time. He was 3 years old. We'd just done a big kind of trip of the Northern Territory, if you will. We'd done a week at Goma, which is a cultural festival in Arnhem Land in Gulkula. And then we'd gone to Darwin for DAF, which is the Darwin Aboriginal Art Fair, and then we did a 15-hour drive from Darwin to Maningrida across Cahill's Crossing, which is the crossing that you see all the crocs hanging out at, back into Arnhem Land to Maningrida to do some filming for Jarrachara, and then I was trying really hard to surprise my mum and my siblings by flying from Maningrida back over to Elko so that they could meet Uzo for the first time. Of course, the surprise didn't go very well because there was family members that were on that flight. So as soon as we landed, they ran straight to my mother and were like, oh, you know, Leila and Uzo's at the airport. So probably 30 seconds after I'd gotten off the flight, I had a phone call. Mum was ringing me. And I'm like, oh. But so it wasn't a surprise, but it was really lovely to be able to take him back, take him to country, for him to connect with that place, to put his feet on that country, to connect with ancestors who live in that sand, in that sky, in that water. And this was taken at sunset. We went down to the beach. As you can see, it's low tide, so we didn't have to worry too much about the crocs. And we just ran up and down, and I took that photo. So it had also been 8 years since I'd been back up on country. The last time I went up to country was in 2015, before this. So generations of kids had become adults in that time as well. But it was just so beautiful to see him just scooped up by his cousin brothers and ran off, and, you know, didn't see him for 2 days because he was just at different families' houses, you know, just living off damper and tea. And he just loved it. He's such a bush kid. He just loves being like in the red dirt and in the sand and in the water, and really gives me the side eye when we come back to Melbourne. And he's like, why do we live here? And it's like, this is our home. This is where we live. So it's really, yeah, so for me, it was about him connecting to a place that, you know, we have ancestral connections to, and, you know, both saltwater people, Owen and I, and I'm not sure if you get the same feeling when you go home, but I get really emotional when I know that I'm going back to the place where my ancestors have been for hundreds of thousands of years, and being able to reconnect with something that hasn't been disconnected is really beautiful. And now, you know, Uzoma gets to do that as well. And, you know, we're going up to Darwin very soon, so we might do a hop, skip and jump over to Alco, we'll see.
Thank you. Both beautiful stories and really powerful images. One thing, I mean, we were talking briefly earlier, you both do a lot of work in cultural capacity building. I guess in you're kind of radiating out from country to guide non-Indigenous people, corporations, organisations in their cultural duty. I'm wondering if you could both speak to what, and I, you know, looking out at everybody here, I would think that there's a lot of people interested in how, if we flip that over and say what makes a receptive or a great organisation or person in those settings, how best to position oneself as a non-Indigenous, perhaps design practitioner or organisation in this space in relation to understanding one's own responsibilities to country, perhaps to ideas of decolonisation, and how we as non-Indigenous people can centre country, and to kind of, I guess, provide impetus to that project.
How long is a piece of string? It's a really big question.
Twice the length of half of it.
Just a couple of dot points.
Just a few dot points. I think the first thing that I want to acknowledge in relation to the work that we do is acknowledge that we aren't the first and we aren't going to be the last. We come, you know, Owen spoke a bit to this in your acknowledgement before, Owen, that, you know, we walk in the footsteps of giants. We are on the shoulders of those who did amazing big work and jobs at times that was really dangerous for First Nations mob, at times when it wasn't okay to even acknowledge being First Nations, being Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander. We're pretty lucky that we're in a day and age where we can proudly say that. There's generations before that didn't have the opportunity to do that, that didn't have opportunities to share culture, to share knowledge, to share language, to share stories, and those sort of things. So I can't speak for Owen, but that's why I do what I do for those that weren't able to do it, in generations past. I think the thing people need to be conscious of, and we spoke a little bit about this in the green room before we came up here, is the idea of demand and supply. So in this day and age, there's a lot of kind of need and want, and I guess pressure for people to become more aware of First Nations perspective, whether that's from embedding into curriculum or wanting to learn more from a corporate business or in a schooling setting and all those sort of things. But we only make up 3.2, was that what you were saying? Something like that? Yeah, so just over 3% of the population. And not every single blackfella out there wants to be doing the work that we're doing, don't necessarily want to be forward-facing, don't necessarily want to be in those spaces sharing that knowledge and those sort of things, which is important and valid to also acknowledge as well. So, sometimes it's hard. A good example is, the Wurundjeri Council. It's different being a council in a big metropolitan city as opposed to being an Aboriginal corporation in Mildura or in Bendigo, for example. There's the supply and demand is so much more bigger in a space like we are currently as well. So just acknowledging that is really, really important, I think. Is there anything else that you wanted to say in relation to that, Owen?
Yeah, exactly that. And then I think it's something we talk about a lot. It's sort of just understanding and remembering where this comes from and why. And I'm talking more specifically about, I suppose, design with country, or just the whole, pretty much reconciliation outwards, right? All of this work and all these spaces came from protest. They came from our elders and their allies being out on the streets, demanding voice, demanding agency, demanding basic human rights, which for a lot of our community has not yet been achieved, demanding access to the resources that were being pillaged from country. And so that kind of gets forgotten in the many lovely and beautiful spaces that get created. Like this is like really lovely right now. But we kind of forget that this all came from protest. And so the best way, in my opinion, to be a participant, if you are non-Indigenous or just even Indigenous at all, because I think about this all the time, is, am I actually honouring what they were demanding? Are we actually delivering on the whole point of this thing? Art has a really important role to play in storytelling, in creating identity in an urban realm, but so often we see a tower go up, they slap a perf screen on it with some art on it, and then they go design with country, and it's like, shut up, honestly. Like, that building cost $2 billion and you spent $1,000 on a panel and you want to walk around and throw a thing on LinkedIn. That's not what they protested for. It's not what our old people protest for. It's not what we protest for. There's so much to this that can be done without having to work with mob when they're busy, and that is redirecting economy into Indigenous spaces and places, making space and reassessing your privilege, and that's either structural privilege as a company, corporation, institution, whatever that might be, or it's personal privilege. That's something I battle with every day. I'm white as hell. I'm a 181 centimetre tall, white presenting Aboriginal man, and I benefit from the patriarchy as much as half the people in this room. But I am Aboriginal, and so I need to weaponise that privilege because I'm invited to spaces that my aunties and so on were not. Even my female presenting colleagues are treated differently, even though they are way smarter than me. Big shout out to Talia Stedman, my God, genius. Anyway, it's checking those things before demanding something from our communities. Otherwise, it's still extraction, it's still colonisation. Alison Page also quite frequently says that design with country is a new wave of colonisation. We spoke about this in the green room. It's not indigenising or decolonising if you're just opening a door and wanting mob to come in. You need to go to a different space and create a new space together. Otherwise, it's just a new form of essentially objectifying and commercialising our identities for corporate benefit.
Yeah, the lack of
blackwashing.
Yeah, the lack of reciprocity that we spoke about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's
So
the
are you-
reflection phase, right?
Yeah, and where do you feel like we're at with that, Owen? Do you feel like, I spoke in the introduction, there has been a radical shift in the profession, a growing thirst, also a requirement from a lot of government projects for architects to engage. But are you seeing a lot of that sort of stuff tokenistic, or do we need to think much deeper about how our built environments might provide ongoing opportunities for mob, communities, economic, cultural, whatever, beyond the built object, beyond the sort of decorated facade or... Yeah,
absolutely. There is so much great work happening. I will say that for sure. I know I say a lot of heavy things. But what's intense is those that are not invested in this space are slowly but surely becoming the minority. And the distance between them and the people who are putting effort in it is becoming wider and wider. And it's becoming more overt, which I think is brilliant, because long stretched out things are fragile, and that means we can break it, right? In terms of tokenism, kind of hard. We're going to see it all over the place, to be honest, but there is a lot of beautiful, meaningful work happening. I will say probably in my opinion, the worst example of tokenism is, at least in Queensland, which, Queensland, is that a contractor or a major developer that takes on a project to deliver it, they can, to achieve their sort of Green Star rating or Indigenous procurement targets, they can either engage First Nations peoples, whether that's consultants or local community, or they can just have a wrap. So you can just have a wrap somewhere in a shelf that you haven't looked at in 10 years.
Dusty, done that, tick the box.
That overrides having to speak to Aboriginal people on that project.
Yeah.
So that's current, right? So there's a lot of, the issues are more systemic. I would say the voices are changing, but the system is yet to change. And everyone in this room has a voice at a table in some way or form, and that's the responsibility we all have, right? So that's, in my opinion, called being a participant in change, yeah.
I think the biggest thing that people have to be conscious of is making sure that any kind of ideas or thoughts that are centred around First Nations people, perspectives, communities, that the consultation with mob happens from inception, because in the past we've always, there's been, it's happened, there's a project and 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, 9 months down the line, 12 months down the line, and then they're tapping, people's shoulders going, oh, we need your thoughts on this, when all of this work has already been done prior to. So it's so important that those conversations happen. First and foremost, context is key. With traditional owners first and foremost, making sure that they're a part of the consultation from day dot. If you're wanting to dig up stuff, making sure that you speak to, First Nations, mob, traditional custodians around their process of making sure that there are no artefacts, significant things to them and their mob that are in those spaces and places. Those things that people tend to not really think about. Yes, there's a shift and change of people doing that now. Even the idea of, naming places, with First Nations language and those sort of things. You see it in, corporates that have rooms named after significant people, or in schools you see, houses, for example, that, red, blue, green, yellow, and now those are being named after, different First Nations animals or things like that. Those are really important, but again, just acknowledging context and where that comes from, and acknowledging that every single day we travel through places and spaces that have First Nations language. We go to High Point, to Maribyrnong, which is a language. We go to the airport, Tullamarine, which is, a suburb that's traditional language. We have over 10 suburbs here in Melbourne that are either direct language names or derived from First Nations language. So every single person that's in this room right now would have travelled through a number of different suburbs that have that language connected to them, those First Nations languages. So it's important about understanding that context, knowing where those language names come from, and just doing that deeper learning and then doing the scaffolding of that learning as well. We are all currently in our spaces, students as well as teachers, constantly in the work that we all do as well. And doing that work personally is much easier than doing it from an organisational or corporate kind of perspective. But again, it has to come from the top down. Again, I know that's a colonial system, but unless you have, the principal and vice principal or the DP in relation to a school, for example, on board and leadership in that space, nothing's going to change. But you don't do that change unless you do the learning, which can create discomfort, but discomfort changes people's hearts and minds. And that's what we really want to do, is shift and change people's perspectives of First Nations people. And I also want to acknowledge that in spite of all of the injustices that have happened, we're still here as First Nations people, and I want to celebrate the black joy and excellence that there is. People like Owen, there's so many great, amazing First Nations people who are doing great, amazing things in their spaces, their respective spaces. I mean, we've got astrophysicists, we've got musicians, we've got visual artists. Inoki, whose artwork is on the main slide that was up, amazing First Nations visual artist, and that was their beautiful work. And in spite of all the injustices and all of the hurdles and speed bumps that we've had as people, that we're still resilient and still fighting the good fight. But I hope, that when my son's older and the next generation after him aren't having to do the same fight, and that they can be in a different space and frame of mind.
I have been probed with questions here and on your reflections on names. I went to a primary school called Burundara, which I was told meant shady place. At the time, I think I was told it was in Aboriginal language, and I wasn't told that there are hundreds of Aboriginal languages. But just to note that Ramona has asks Open House Melbourne, I don't know where you are, Tanya, up there, will Open House Melbourne, or are they already considering changing their name to Open House Naarm Melbourne? Something to think about. There are a lot of really super great questions here, so thank you for being such an interactive and engaged audience. I feel like a lot of these questions have already somewhat been covered in your very thoughtful answers, Leila and Owen. But perhaps one thing also on that has come up in one of these questions is the tricky tension of one doing the right thing, of speaking to mobs, speaking to community, but on the other hand, also being acutely aware of overburdening, and you mentioned the Wurundjeri, and it reminded me Gary Foley does this great speech directed to non-Indigenous Melburnians in particular, saying, do your homework first. And I feel like since he did that, there's a lot of resources out there available online, and our councillor mentioned a lot of them tonight, but it's becoming a lot easier for us non-Indigenous folk to build up our own knowledge and our own journeys as well, but certainly needs to happen from the top as well. I think, Leila, you spoke to this point earlier, but one person, anonymous, has written, maybe this is for you, Owen, how do you maintain a connection to country when you're not on country?
Through people. You know, country is many things. It's time folded in on itself. It's a place. It's also a feeling. But more importantly, it's an ontology. It's an extension of your sense of being. And so to participate in country is to hold to the relationships that I have with my mob from really far away, but also locally back at home. And so it just comes back to understanding that country is fluid and interwoven, and we all have a responsibility for it, even if we're a visitor there. You know, our communities, it wasn't like, we're from here and here's a gate and get out. It's like, no, you just have a different role here. And so I just have a different role on Mugunjin and Yagara and Turrbal country, and that's how I connect there. Yeah, flights to Perth, pretty expensive. But yeah, it's just through people and care and relationships.
And you did touch on one anonymous person who has asked if you could both explain in more depth what country actually means to you. I feel like you've sort of danced around that, and people certainly, family certainly is part of that. And I think a lot of non-Indigenous designers, or maybe designers in general, sometimes forget about people. But Leila, have you got some thoughts on how you might expand on what country means to you?
Yes. So country, a lot like what Owen said, is a physical place, obviously, but it's interconnected and interwoven. You know, First Nations knowledges don't sit in silos. So we've, you know, since time in memoriam, we've done the work of learning about maths and English and science and art and spirituality, whatever that looks like to respective First Nations people, all at the same time. So, you know, that kind of speaks to, it's a slightly random tangent, but the whole idea of pigeonholing subjects in the colonial kind of education system, whereas we don't do that from a First Nations perspective. We're connected to country because country is a part of us and we are a part of country. So even though I've lived, very, very far away, I couldn't be much further away from country unless I lived in Tasmania, from, northeast Arnhem Land to Alco Island to Yulendj country than what I currently am, and that's also an extension to my son, Uzalmar, as well, but we ourselves hold a piece of country as well. And I also say this to a lot of people who come to Gurruwiwi as well, that space is a space where we exchange stories, exchange knowledge, and whatnot, and that a piece of country is also leaving with those people, whether they are mob from other respective countries or non-Indigenous people who have come into our space, our Yulendj space up at Gurruwiwi, that they too will leave with a piece of country, and a piece of them will also stay on our country as well. And because of that, I remember quite a number of years ago, one of my brother-in-law actually asked me this question. He's passed away now, but he said to me, "Oh, where is home to you?" And it was a very loaded question. And I said to him, well, home is all the places that I have memories and roots. Obviously, Alco Island, Arnhem Land is where my ancestral roots are, and I will forever be connected to that place. And it doesn't matter how long until you get back to that country, that place will always know you and you will always know it. I have deep roots in Bendigo, on Dja Dja Wurrung country. That place is familiar to me. As soon as I shift from being in, Tongarong country or Wurundjeri country and I'm moving into Dja Dja Wurrung country, it's like my body senses that I'm going into that space that I've known since I was 18 months old, a place that holds a lot of memories for me because of that. Here, Naarm, Wurundjeri country will forever be connected to me because this is where, my baby boy's story started. He was born at the Royal Women's Hospital as well. So we'll forever have roots in this place as well. So it's not necessarily, it's all those things. It's feeling, it's memories, it's place, it's people. And, every single person in this room, even if you don't really kind of think about it all the time, have your own kind of stories of country, whether it's a place that you go and have picnics with your family, or that place on the Murray River that you go with your family every summer and, swing off a tyre swing into the Murray, or, or even just a wonderful, place that you go to dinner with friends, and that's been a regular thing that you've done for the last 10, 20 years. Those are connections, and when I think of country, that's what I think of. But again, it's that extra layer of that ancestral thing. When I don't tend to do acknowledgements in the formal way that we do them, but if I'm going to a place that I've never been to before, I'll say an acknowledgement in my head, and I'll say, my name is Gurruwiwi, Gurruwiwi, my name's Leila, I'm Yulendj, I'm from Arnhem Land, please accept me into your space and know that I'm coming here with a good heart and not wanting to harm country, especially if I've never been there before. And it's my way of introducing myself to the ancestors that are in that space. And I do that in my mind. And it's just something that I've done since I could remember, because I always think when I travel across country, and I've been really privileged in the work that I've done, in television and media and arts and in education, that I've moved across many respective countries of what we now call Australia, and I always constantly think about how our old people used to travel across country in these beautiful spaces and places, and how we now, as contemporary blackfellas, are doing that same thing. But I know it's a bit of a long-winded, but that's country for me.
Oh, and I'm sure you might want to add to that, do you?
Yeah, completely disagree. No, at all.
Damn it.
Nah, honestly, it really just comes down to, it's a relationship, for example, Cubby country is in my opinion, that's obviously that's not my ancestral country, but that's home for me. And you build a relationship with that place as a person through texture, smell, sight, all those kinds of things, and you care for it. And then when you do get the opportunity to chat to the people who are from there, and you learn the lore of that place, suddenly it explodes in your mind and everything folds in on itself. Like back home, there's a plant called the hot bush. When it goes pink, it means the oysters in the bay are ready to be caught. And now the hot bush grows pretty far away from the bay. But when you're standing there and you're looking at it and you're touching it, you're also in the bay because of the relationship that exists. Cubby, for example, have words that for a tree, and it's the same word for the mullet, because when the tree does a particular thing, that means the mullets are ready. And it's just this folding in of a relationship that you're part of. And colonialism separates us from that very, very deeply. So it just comes back to those relationships of place, which I might just touch on it slightly, like the idea of when mob are busy and you're not even sure if you can engage, or you get told you can't because there's no capacity or whatever. Really, if you're honouring the relationship and the participation of your project on that place, it's not your job to tell the stories of the mob, that's their job. Don't try to replicate their stories without them. But if you're participating in caring for that place with your project, whether that's through ecology, whether it's through sightlines, whether it's through challenging something and giving back to that place in as little harm as possible in a very extractive environment, then you are participating in care for that part of country. Because again, different roles on country if you're not from there. It's still a responsibility. You don't have to have some story because that's not yours to tell. But you can still care and give a damn and try. And that's part of the ethos in the base. It's not all of everything, but that's a really important role that people forget because the client tells you have to chat to mob because we're trying to hit this target and whatever.
And the other thing that I want to acknowledge on that as well is a little while ago, myself and my Maori, Maitili Marika, we hosted a group of people from AGSA, the Art Gallery of South Australia, up in Arnhem Land in Nhulunbuy, and we took them to some of the Macassan beach. Macassans being from Indonesia and a big, connection to them prior to colonisation. Another whole story for another day. But my Maori Maitili was talking to some of these people from AGSA, and she said something that really stuck with me. And I think of it in relation to not just Yolngu people, but First Nations people generally. And what she said was that Yolngu people move at the speed of trust. And I think that is true for First Nations people generally, that First Nations people move at the speed of trust, which means that they don't move in the same sort of way as we as busy people here live in Melbourne that have a deadline at close of business on Friday. They only move if they truly trust that person, that business, that organisation, that school, and that may take time. And that might take a really long time. There's lots of communities, like Owen said before, that have had knowledges extracted, sometimes very violently, from them. So it's important for you to understand that sometimes if you do reach out that first time, that second time, that third time, that it may take them a while to come back and say, yes, we are ready to sit at that table and have those conversations with you. But it's not until there's true trust there, then you see that shift and change happen, and then that reciprocity can happen. And it's not just about what we bring to the table, but also what you as non-Indigenous people, as allies to us, can also bring to the table.
I think that's a very important point, and I learned that pretty quickly a while back, the importance of building respectful relationships and trustful relationships. And that's a tricky thing to navigate in the built environment when there's one set of deadlines. We need to think about how we can change that. I've got a question, Owen, that I think many people here will want to know an answer to, not to put the pressure on you. I've got an example I can think from my non-Indigenous perspective, but over to you on this one. Please give us an actual practical example of designing with country. What has been done that, or what should be done that would satisfy this criteria?
My personal opinion on design with country is, as an extension of our ontology, if an Aboriginal person was not involved and it did not give back to that community in such a way that it achieved their aspirations, you did not do design with country. That is my opinion. The other part, though, in a more fun way, is amplifying those voices. And they can be very tiny and minuscule. And as a designer, it can be really hard when you're like, ooh, bougie design, I know it's good. And then you might chat to an auntie and they're like, the story is we used to go fishing here and I want a giant fishing rod in the thing. And if that's their aspirations, and that's your responsibility to make it pretty and figure that out. But designing with country is designing with the aspirations of First Nations people. That is the baseline. That is going to look different every single time. Sometimes it might be a yarning circle, which were invented by white people. I need to say that publicly. They just saw the aunties weaving and chatting together, and then they went, we'll make you a chair out there, and the yarn, that's where that comes from. I can't imagine being 70 with sciatica wanting to sit on a sandstone block outside instead of the aircon cushion, just to put it out there. But sometimes the mob want that, and that's what they get. So, that's designing with country. But otherwise, in my opinion, it's reinstating capacity to build relationships that were always there. So if you've got the aspirations and the voice of community to drive the direction, the elements, you then as a designer need to dig deeper to understand through your design tools, which are not invalid just because you're working in this space. It's really important. You just need to fine tune how to use them to achieve those aspirations and the power that you all have. And one of them is thinking very deeply within your capacity to care and connect to place. Is your design building the capacity for people to build a relationship with what potentially was there? Maybe it's a likeness of what was there, or what still is there? Or is your project reinstating or creating a new experience that is antithetical to the identity or character of that place? Because if so, I would say you are challenging country and not designing with country. So it's aspirations, connections, relationships. If those things aren't happening, then you're not doing it, in my opinion. Everybody has a different opinion, just saying that. Yep.
Very succinctly put. I did want to mention that I recently went up to Shepparton to check out the Monara Regional Centre of Excellence designed by ARM. That was an Aboriginal-led project in every way through and through, led by, it was a vision of Uncle Paul Briggs, Yorta Yorta Elder. The whole community were deeply involved in that process. There were around 40 engagement sessions, but the commitment and dedication and contribution from the community just really was very powerful. Indigenous construction company, jobs were created, and I thought that was very powerful because it wasn't just about the building, it wasn't just about, well, the community being involved was so powerful, but also giving back to community through employment opportunities. This construction company, you know, skilled up, was able to now go on and build more larger projects, and I thought that was really outstanding example. I don't know if anyone from ARM's here, but awesome job in working with the community there. We're probably running out of time, aren't we? I'm being told to shut up. Okay. Sorry.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on, and I can see that we are running out of time. We're running out of that speed of trust and into a crashing deadline. So with all due haste, I reckon I'll
zip
hand
it, Christine.
Over.
I'm being told to zip it.
I think it would just in closing say thank you so much to Leila and Owen. It's been fantastic. We've been extremely privileged, and thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and your relationships, really, which has been really fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you both, and thank you to all of you.
And I would just like to reiterate my thanks to all of you, to Leila, Owen, Jock and Christine, to all of you who have come to see this. It's wonderful to hear these stories shared. As mentioned before, Stories of the City is our theme this year, and you can share your stories at the Bates Smart Gallery over the weekend if you would like to. You can also check out the City of Melbourne pop-up library on your way out, and this is the QR code for our program for the weekend festival. I'd like to thank Melbourne Conversations tonight for their support and Fed Square for hosting us in this lovely space. A huge thanks to the City of Melbourne, Creative Victoria, eFront and Studio Pain for their support as major partners of the 2025 Open House Melbourne weekend. I hope to see you out and about this weekend. Take care. Thank you.